Our gospel lesson today is from the Gospel of Matthew. We are in chapter 16, verses 13 through 18. And when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." This is the reading of the word of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. I have a 45-minute sermon today. So we're going to split it in half, as I sometimes do, to make it a little easier to digest. So we'll be continuing the Who Are You next week. Now there's some differences between people. Those differences are like the difference between knowledge and information. It's a difference between, for instance, success and failure, whether you know knowledge or whether you have information. Sometimes it can be the difference between whether you're rich or whether you're poor, and that depends on whether you have knowledge or information. The difference sometimes between power and weakness is knowledge or information. The difference between joy and despair is the difference sometimes between knowledge and information. And the difference between trust and distrust is sometimes the difference between knowledge and information. If you go to buy a car, we know that used car salesmen are some of the most notorious people, right? You can't really know whether you trust a used car salesman or not, because their interest and your interests are pretty much polar opposites when you go in there. However, if somebody says to you, "Well, I've dealt with Job many times. I bought several cars from him. He's always given me a good deal. I trust Joe," then how do you approach that used car salesman? It's different, isn't it? Yeah. You would walk in. You might even mention the name of your friend that sent you there, and you would have a higher level of trust. That's because you've got some real information about that person. You don't walk in blind like you might. If we have discovery, we have knowledge. Now, discovery and knowledge kind of goes hand in hand. They lead to each other. If you have discovery, if you discover something, you gain what? Knowledge, right? And if you have knowledge, you're more likely to have the information necessary to do what? Discover something new. That's why I say discovery and knowledge go hand in hand. Alexander Graham Bell, he invented the telephone, And it took quite a bit of knowledge about physics and electricity, all of which he gained over years and years and years of experimentation before he was actually able to do the invention that the telephone existed. Airplane. Lots of people were involved in the development of the airplane. And, well, it took a lot of knowledge to get that thing to fly, I can tell you. Automobiles, the same way. Charles Goodyear discovered rubber, and he did it by accident. He managed to figure out how to make rubber, and, well, it changed everything, didn't it? It made transportation possible in a way that had never been possible before. Do we still say Columbus discovered America? I don't know. He didn't have as much knowledge as he thought he had, but he still happened upon a new continent that actually had been visited by Europeans before, but he didn't know that. None of us knew that. Now we know the Vikings were here centuries before Columbus. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. And it turned out to be our first antibiotic. A really pretty important discovery. But today I want to talk about a different kind of discovery. I want to talk about self-discovery. And that self-discovery is begun with the question, who are you? Any of you remember the story of Jacob and Esau? Genesis 27 tells us a story of Jacob and Esau. Now, Jacob stole Esau's identity. You may think identity theft is new. Been around a long time. Jacob stole Esau's identity in order to receive the blessing that his father had reserved for Esau. Now, it's a kind of a complicated story, and you really need to think about it as you read it. So go to Genesis 27 and read that there. The bottom line is, it's kind of important who you are. It's really important. There's consequences of not knowing who you are. Think about some of these consequences. The devil tried to get Jesus to doubt his own identity. When he went into the desert for 40 days and he was tempted, the devil said to Jesus, you know what? I'll give you control of all these lands. I will allow you to rule over these cities, and all you have to do is what I tell you. You have to do this miracle. And so turn these stones into bread. Now, if Jesus didn't know who he was, if Jesus didn't know what his mission was, he might have been pretty tempted by that, don't you think? That sounds like a pretty good deal. And all I have to do is turn the stones into bread. But Jesus knew exactly who he was. He knew why he was there, and he had no reason to give in to the temptation, because the little bit of power that the devil hung before Jesus paled to his real power, right? Yeah, didn't come close to what Jesus really had power over. Jesus had to know who he was in order to overcome the temptations of the devil. In the prodigal son, and I am assuming that most of us know that story of the prodigal son, The son took his father's inheritance. He said he wanted it now. And he took that inheritance and he ran off and he spent all of the inheritance on wild things. He tried every bad type of living that you can imagine until he had spent his entire inheritance and ended up eating with the pigs because he couldn't afford a meal for himself. So there is the prodigal son. He's dining with pigs, and suddenly he remembers who he is. Wait a minute. I'm not a victim, he says. I'm a son. I'm not a slave. I can go home. And he does. Now you might think that since he had squandered his inheritance, he wouldn't have been welcomed at home. But this story's a little different, isn't it? Because when he got home, his father welcomed him with a big party and celebrated the fact that he had come home. Uh-oh. I knew I'd do that. So, who are you? Do you see the consequences of not knowing who you are? And there's a lot of other consequences when we don't know who we are. Now, just to help me figure out, yeah, it's there. To help me figure out who I am, I decided just to type Chris Dare into the search engine on my computer and see what come up, because maybe I'd find out who I was. So this guy's Chris Dare, not the one in the bow tie, the other one. I don't know what he's doing. I think he's attending a party in a parking garage. I'm not really sure. But he's Chris Dare. Now, this guy is Chris Dare. He's a magician. And he runs a website that says Dare to Believe, and he appears all over the country as a magician. I thought the name of that website was pretty good. It would work for a pastor too, wouldn't it? Yeah, Dare to Believe. I may just have to rip that off. I don't know. Now, I have no idea why the caption under this picture said Chris Dare, but it did. That absolutely did. This guy's Chris Dare. This guy's Chris Dare. If you look real close at the picture, you can actually see Dare on his as his name on his uniform there. And he was a medic in Afghanistan. That's something. Chris Dare. Yep. And Chris Dare is also a professional sailing person in Australia, I discovered. So, yeah, he's in regattas and races and all kinds of things on his sailboat in Australia. Now, not all the things I found about Chris Dare were highly positive. Yeah, one of the things I found were mug shots of Chris Dare. This is Chris Dare right there. I have no idea what this guy did, by the way. That wasn't clear. And this guy's Chris Dare also. And again, I have no idea what he did. But, I guess you can show up pretty much anywhere. And you don't have to exactly type your name in. So I went ahead and thought, I'm going to type in Pastor Chris. And let's see what comes up when I type in Pastor Chris. So I did that. This is Pastor Chris. This is Pastor Chris. This is Pastor Chris. I don't know if you see any of those you think would be better than me. I could try to give him a call. That's Pastor Chris. Kind of interesting. This is Pastor Chris. I was thinking the hip look might be, should I go for the t-shirt and jeans thing? Have you gotten tired of the tie yet? Nobody else wears one, that's for sure. So. And this is Pastor Chris. And this is Pastor Chris. And where? Oh, and that one's Pastor Chris. Now, I'm not sure I discovered a lot about who I am by doing that, but it occurred to me that I don't have to just type in my own name, right? I can type in anybody's name. So I typed in now if I figure if he can dish it out, he can take it, right? So here's Paul Ireland. Now this Paul Ireland is, it turns out this is one of his publicity shots. He's a famous English actor. He's been in a variety of movies. I saw some of the things, and there's a lot. It's hard to find anything about Paul Ireland that doesn't include this guy. So I had to work a little bit for the rest of this because everything is about this guy. This is Paul Ireland. He's a boxer, interestingly enough. This is Paul Ireland. He's an author. His books are on Amazon if you want to look him up. And I have no idea what the genre is, so I didn't look it up. But this is Paul Ireland. He's a business manager. And there's one more, and this Paul Ireland just looks dangerous to me. Yeah, he's a policeman, and wow. Yeah, you can look up anybody. Now, whether it's going to really give you an idea of who you are or not, I can't really say. I have a feeling that it's not going to teach you a whole lot. Now, Jesus knew who he was. He knew what his mission was. And I think about the consequences if he didn't know who he was. Now, some people he told he was living water. Some people he told he was the bread of life. Some people he told he was the Son of God. Others he told he was the way, the truth, and the life. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of more names that we have for Christ. If Jesus didn't know who he was, if Jesus had succumbed to the temptation that the devil put out there for him, the story would be real different, wouldn't it? The story would be tragically different. In fact, I don't think of just what the consequences would have been for Jesus. I think of what the consequences would have been for me. Right? If Jesus didn't know he were the Savior, if he didn't know that he was on a mission to bring all of mankind into relationship with himself, with God, if he didn't know who he was, we all would have suffered. So my question for you is, who are you? Do you see there's consequences in not knowing who you are? What's your spiritual calling? What's your mission in life? Because all of those things describe your relationship to God and to the rest of us. That's how we know what that relationship is, by knowing who we are, by knowing what our spiritual calling is, by knowing what our mission in life is. There's something else that comes out of knowing who you are, and that is you know your value. Now, you know how I feel about self-esteem. Where does our esteem come from? It comes from God. He's the one that gives us value. We can't give ourselves value. We know what our value is when we know who we are. And because our relationship to God is defined in who we are, we also know where our value comes from. Our ignorance of ourselves is dangerous. We have to know who we are. Otherwise, we might give in to temptation. Otherwise, we might go off script. Otherwise, we might not fulfill the mission that Jesus has for us. Otherwise, we will suffer, and the people that we were supposed to be loving, encouraging, helping, they too will suffer. So, here's some symptoms of not knowing yourself. The first one is living in fear. Living in fear. You know anybody that lives in fear? I've known a lot of people that live in fear. I know people who fear defined everything they did. Fear defined every decision they made. Fear was their entire basis for living. Fear. If you don't know who you are, you live in fear. And if you are living in fear, then I will say that you don't know who you are. You know what your response to fear is, by the way? Your response to fear is to try to order your entire world around you. Everything has a place, so you try to put everything in its place. Every person has a place, so you try to put every person in their place. Because you have this idea that somehow if you can control every element of things around you, then you won't be in fear anymore. Does that work? Does that work for anybody? Has it? No. Because we always find something that we can't control, don't we? Always, always, no exceptions. There's things we can't control, and our fear returns. The second symptom of not knowing yourself is not knowing your purpose in this world. So God gives us gifts, He gives us talents, He gives us passion, He gives us this kind of spiritual leading, which I will refer to as a calling. And if you don't know yourself, you won't know your purpose in this world. And the last one I have here is self-hatred or self-condemnation. If you don't know yourself, you will hate yourself. You will condemn yourself. You'll feel, and I'm just going to say this with emphasis on feel, you will feel like you are unwanted, unloved, unneeded, unliked. Do you know that I've had people in my ministry that have come to me and I happen to know that they're surrounded by family that loves them. I happen to know that they're surrounded by church family that loves them. I happen to know that they have employers that really value them, and they come to me and they say, Pastor Chris, nobody loves me. How? How could they not know when so many people care about them? They become withdrawn. They have no initiative, no motivation. They think they have no friends. They can't find anything good to think about, right? They're always thinking about bad things, dark places. Their fears, if we go back to the top of the list. Everything happens to them in extremes. And in fact, sometimes those extremes will take a person to a place that no one should be, where they cut themselves, where they have bulimia and lose weight and become stick figures, where they isolate themselves and never come out into the light and never relate to people. When we don't know ourselves, it keeps us from doing what God designed us to do. And when we don't do what God designed us to do, we lose our joy. We never find it again. There is nothing that brings more joy to us in life than doing what God designed us to do. And if you know who you are, you will do that. We'll talk a little more about this next week. God bless.